right, so we're going to start today by going over a clarification from last time. I realized I did a very poor job explaining this. This is a slightly different graphic from the one we were using last time. I tripped myself up trying to approach it from two different ways the same and didn't do a good job separating those two out. So I got one that will explain it from the way I wanted to, just to make things easier. So this is a chart of two parents at the top, one who is dominant, recessive, dominant, recessive, dominant, recessive for the three genes that control skin color. And the other parent is the exact same thing. Now, when they have kids, they're going to give half of their genes. So they can give the dominant A or the lower A, the dominant B or the recessive B, the dominant C or the recessive C. So the capital is dominant, the recessive is the lowercase. And they could give one of each. Now, they could give all dominant, all capital, or all recessive. And so you see there at the big chart at the bottom, all the potentials as far as their children. If they had 64 children, they could have one of each. As far as the probabilities of any individual child, you can see down there at the bottom, 0 to 6 are the tone of skin, and then the probability 1 out of 64 to 20 out of 64 for each tone of skin. And it has been shown that two of the opposite extremes have occurred in a single pregnancy with twins. And this has occurred several times. Now, I just wanted to go over that because I did a really bad job explaining it. You guys are learning a lot of complex material, and I'm learning to teach a lot of complex material. And unfortunately, your job relies on me. So if you have any questions, there's a very good chance that it is because I'm not explaining it well. So feel free to give a call, give a text. We got phones waiting. So if you have any questions, let us know. But as far as the lecture I was hoping to give today, we're going to start with the second portion of day 6, man. So day 6, we have a little bit of information in Genesis 1, basically God forming man out of the dust and creating man in his own image. And then in Genesis 2, we have a bit more in detail version of day 6, where we see a few other things occurred. Basically, Adam naming the animals, and these are kinds of animals, not species, but kinds. And then he fell asleep, and then Eve was formed from the rib of Adam, and then Adam broke out in poetry when he saw her. And so we have a lot more information there to go on as far as the creation of man. But today we're going to be focusing on apes and man. So Genesis 1 and 2 leave no opening for apes turning into humans. No opening for that. We were created from dust, and then Eve, woman, was created from man. Yet the secular secular theory holds that apes turned into humans. First, we're going to go over a few differences in ape and human anatomy, focusing on the bones, because we're going to go over a few of the supposed transition species. These are the species that are found in the fossil record that supposedly show a transition from apes to humans. We're not going to go through all of them. We're going to go through some of the bigger ones, and hopefully that will give you a good idea of the information they're bringing to this. The first, and one of the biggest, is something called the foramen magnum. This is a hole in the back of your head where your spine enters into your brain. Now, this orientation, where the spine goes into the brain, depends on how you're going to be moving around. So in humans, you can see the skull with the E underneath it. The foramen magnum, that big hole, is found underneath the skull because we're going to be walking upright. And if we try to crawl or walk on all fours, we're going to have to bend our head, and it's not going to feel very good if we hold it like that long term because we're bending this. Apes, on the other hand, while they're going to spend most of their time walking on all fours, that's going to be best for this foramen magnum, this hole. They can walk on two legs and lumber a bit, but to do so, they have to crank their neck down, and it's not a good position for this. Now, according to the evolutionary theory, there is a transition from this kind of skull formation to the human kind of skull formation. Yet there is no evidence in the fossil record of this. We can do measurements of the foramen magnum, and while there is a range, the human range and the ape range are separate. So the different measurements that we can get for the foramen magnum for apes is outside the range of measurements for humans. And this is the case with the vast majority of things we're going to be looking at today. Sticking with the skull, the sloped versus the vertical face is another difference. Now, in humans, we have a very flat face for the most part. We can see right in front of us, but we also can bend our eyes down and look down at our feet. Feel free to try this out at home. You can look around and see without actually moving your head, just by moving your eyes, and you can see right where your feet are going to be. Apes, on the other hand, because of their very protruding jaw, you can see there in the field and the picture there, their field of view. Now, they can't see right in front of them. And if they're trying to walk on two legs, they have to bend it even further to see where they're looking, to see where they're walking. And we can measure this as well with something called the zygomatic arch. This is your little cheekbone there, the bone right underneath the eye. So we can do measurements and get a good range for each. The next are the teeth. And these are some of the most frequently found fossils for both humans and apes. That's a group called primates. So primates are both humans and apes grouped together. Doesn't say anything about the relationship, just similarities. And teeth are commonly found because they are very hard. Enamel is much more hard than bone. And humans have very thick enamel. And so this is why whenever they find a tooth that has thick enamel, they try to say this is a human tooth. Yet if they find it with ape bones, they then try to say that this ape is going to turn into a human. While it is true humans generally do have thicker enamel, apes tend to have a thinner enamel, yet there are some exceptions. There are some overlap in this. So as far as the shape of the jaw, humans are more parabolic, apes are more U-shaped. So when you look at a mouth guard in humans, that's how a human jaw is oriented. Apes are a bit different. There is some similarity with that. Teeth size. Humans generally have small incisors and small canines. Yet apes in general have bigger ones, but there are a few exceptions. Some species of baboons, for example, have small canines and small incisors. Not what we think of when we think of baboons, but some species do. And as far as the thickness of the enamel, orangutans especially have thick enamel. And so whenever they find a tooth, they try to say that this is human, but there are modern apes that have this characteristic as well. And so they have to look at things that are specific for humans or specific for apes, yet they still try to always push it over to the human side, even though they find an ape with similar teeth. Brain size. Now, the average human adult has a brain size of about 1,400 centimeters cubed. Don't need to know what that is in inches, just know that it's about that number. But it can vary. It can get as small as 700 to as large as 2,000 centimeters cubed. But this is simply because of body size. It does not have anything to do with intelligence. So the smaller you are, the smaller your brain. And that's why males in general have a larger brain, because we are larger. We need that extra space to deal with our larger body. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Intelligence is more about the interconnection. And that is a major difference, but we're going to be focusing on the size of the brain, not necessarily what is inside the brain, because we're looking at fossils. Apes, they're in general about a third of the size of the human, 300 to 500 centimeters cubed. And again, this varies with their body size. You can see a chart here of humans and apes. The human, on average, is vastly larger compared to the averages of the other species of apes. Gorilla, orangutan, chimpanzee are the largest, and therefore they have the largest brain. The smaller apes have smaller brains. But a gorilla is far larger than a human, so that difference, and orangutan too, so those differences are not based upon size. Now let's look at the hands. Our hands are designed for very sophisticated tasks. We can do a number of things. Basically, we can have a variety of movement in our hands. We can basically make a fully extended hand and curl it into a tight fist, and a number of other movements in between. Apes, on the other hand, have very crude hands. Their hands are mainly designed for gripping branches and knuckle walking. They can either walk on their fists or their knuckles, and their bones are naturally curved, meaning instead of being straight in the finger, it has a curve to it, making it better to grasp things like branches. As far as the knuckle walking, their wrists are specially designed for this. They can lock their wrist, similar to how we lock our knees, because they are putting a lot of pressure on this and spending a lot of time putting this weight on their wrists. So to help them walk on their wrists, walk on their knuckles, their wrists lock. Humans don't. And our finger bones are vastly different. Humans tend to have shorter, straighter, and flatter bones. You can't see the curve in that picture here on the left very well, just because of the angle, but if you were to look at it from the side, you could see that the chimpanzee bones would be curved, and I have a few images of that later on. The thumb is especially different. The human thumb is relatively long. You can see there in the picture, even though that it is positioned to match size, the thumb is vastly longer than the chimpanzee thumb. And our thumb is very flexible. We can touch the tip of each of our finger and even run the thumb down each finger and do a decent area of the palm as well. That's why we can do magic tricks and stuff like that. But an ape can't. It's very short and relatively inflexible. So it lacks the range of motion that a human can. So some very notable differences in the hands. The pelvis has a lot of differences as well. So the pelvis is what is needed to be able to walk upright, or one of the things. You have to have an upright pelvis, but you also have to have upright knees. If your knee joints aren't designed to walk on two legs, then it doesn't matter if your pelvis is or not, you're going to have problems, or vice versa. Say we had an upright pelvis, but we didn't have the upright knees. We're going to be falling backwards every time we try to stand up. Or if we have the upright knees without the upright hips, then we're going to have a danger of falling forward every time we try to stand up. This is another example of irreducible complexity. We have to have both at the same time for them to work. Now, as far as the shape, you can see that the humans have round, curved forward iliac blades there, the hip bones. But apes, they project out to the side, really far out to the side, you can see there. And the way we walk is different. When apes do walk two-legged, they have a lot of difficulty with this. Humans, we can fully extend our legs because of the iliac blades and the gluteus medius. This is basically your middle butt muscle. And because of the shape of the hips, we know where this muscle is, and it allows for great two-legged walking. It allows us to balance on one leg, and if you actually try to do that, you can feel that muscle moving. While apes, they don't have the same kind of muscle, so when they walk, they have to lumber, leaning from side to side for a variety of reasons. But if you want to try to actually swing your leg out to the side, you're also using that muscle. And apes, like I said, they cannot fully extend. The gluteus medius in the ape actually serves to extend the hip, bringing the upper body to a more vertical position. So they use that to straighten up and be able to lumber on two legs, versus the human that use that to actually walk on two legs and balance. And now for the knees. Now the knees are very specially designed for two-legged movement. For one instance, we have an angle to our knees. Now we need to have our feet close to center line, the center of our body mass. So whenever we're walking, we're going to be spending a lot of time on one leg as we lift the other to move it forward. And we need to be able to balance on that. And try to stand up and stand on one leg. You're going to move that leg underneath the most of your body. Otherwise, you're going to topple over easily. Apes don't have that. They have a very straight leg in general. They don't bend their legs inward like we do. Now, there are a few exceptions to this, but for the most part, this requires them to lean from side to side for this as well. But like I said, there are some exceptions. Orangutans and spider monkeys do have the same high carrying angle, or at least a similar one to humans. But they are both adept tree climbers, and this allows them to walk on a branch because they're going to need their feet underneath. Yet if they still were to walk on the ground, or even in the tree for that matter, they're going to have the same lumbering gait. Yet whenever evolutionists find a high carrying angle, like we find in humans, in an ape, they try to say that that ape is turning into a human, not that it is related to orangutans or spider monkeys, which, since most of the characteristics fit this, would be a far better explanation than trying to say that it's somehow going to turn into a human. The knees are especially more designed for two-legged walking because they can lock. Our knees have a rotation to the tibia, that's the bottom bone of your leg, that rotates about 5 degrees and allowing it to lock in place. You can see an image of that there. And that's why I can stand up here and talk for about 45 minutes, hopefully, and not have to strain myself too much. At least not my legs anyway. My voice is another matter. So when you're standing for a long period of time, you're going to lock your knee. I'm sure if you're standing up now, you're probably doing the same thing. And it makes it very much easier. Apes, on the other hand, can't. It takes a significant amount of effort to straighten those knees and it's very difficult. And so they can't walk in that way, so they're relying completely on muscle strength whenever they try to straighten their legs. And when they walk, they can't put one foot down, put their weight on it, lock the knee, and then lift the other one forward. They have to have that knee somewhat bent to maintain that muscle strength and hold that leg straight-ish. Try walking with your knees bent, and you can see the extreme difference as far as the effort it takes to walk just a few steps. So these are just a few of the things that when people are looking at fossils that they try to figure out, are these bones ape or are these bones human? The difficulty is that they usually don't have that many bones. And we're going to go through some of those examples. You can see that there is some overlap. We do have some similar teeth or some overlap with that, as well as a similar carrying angle of the knee bones. But the vast majority, there are extreme differences. And if they were to take all these differences, all these things into account when finding a specimen, there would be no question ape or human. Now we're going to go over some of the actual transition species. We'll take our time with this because this is a lot of information. But if you want to know a little bit more than what we're going over today, Bones of Contention is a great resource for this. I believe he goes through all of the known bones at the time anyway, of humans or apes, because there's not a lot of them. They say that they could actually fit in the back of a pick trip if you took all of the ape and all of the human bones that we have found. Yet still there is no finely tuned gradual organic chain. This was a problem when Darwin created evolution, and it's a problem now 150 plus some years later. Here are lists of at least some of the supposed transition species. On the left, you have all the apes. On the right, for the most part, are humans. There are some exceptions, but the most part, whenever you hear of Homo such and such, that's probably a human. Now, Homo habilis is an exception to that. That is a mixture of things which we will go into. There's also a newer one called Homo naledi that is currently being discovered. And initially there was a lot of hubbub about it as far as it being a big transition species because it was all human-like. Yet now, just probably a few years later after its discovery, the evolutionists themselves are tearing it to pieces saying, no, it's just an ape, no, it's just an ape. They're poking holes in a lot of these initial claims. You can actually see a documentary on this on Netflix that came out, I believe, a year or so ago. And they try to really push that this is an ape that was a human. Yet a lot of their claims are extremely suspect after you start to dig into it and have been proven to be false. And that's the good thing about transition species. There's not really any truth there. And so we don't really have to dig a lot to get to the bottom of this. We can let the evolutionary community do it themselves. Since there's nothing really supporting a lot of these transition species, all we have to do is wait, and soon another evolutionist is going to want to put their species in there, a different species, so that they can have that fame, that notoriety. And that's why most of these are going to be crossed off the list if they haven't already. And that's why many others have already been crossed over. It's not because of what we as creationist scientists have been trying to do, it's all been them. So whenever you hear of a new transition species, just give it some time and new information will come out relatively quickly, as it tends to do now, and you can get to the bottom of it. So don't worry if you see headlines about this species or that species, whether it's human to ape, or ape to human, I guess, for the evolutionary folks, or animal to animal. So I just want you to have that in your mind as we go forward, or as you go forward and you see news coming out. The first supposed transition species in this list is something called Ida. And thankfully most of these have nicknames, so you don't have to worry about their long scientific names. And here is a picture of what it supposedly looked like. You can see some bones there and a comparison to what it actually is. It's just a lemur. The feet, the body, match almost identical to a lemur. Yet, still you have some people like David Attenborough say that this little creature is going to show us our connection with the rest of all the mammals, the cows and sheep, or with cows and sheep and elephants and anteaters. This was on a BBC documentary. The more you look at Ida, the more you can see, as it were, the primate in embryo. It's just a lemur. There's nothing special about it. It is just a lemur that they try to use in the human or ape to human transition because it is found in the rocks that they date to the time they want. The next is Ardi. you can see a replica of a skull that they found. The brown portion is the bones that they actually found. The gray is what they filled in. Artie supposedly existed 4 to 5 million years ago, based upon the evolutionary theory. You can see all the bones that they found on the left, and on the right, a close-up of the skull as well as the hip. Now, they only have a few pieces of the skull, as you saw before, and they're missing the foramen magnum, that hole in the back of your head where your spine enters, and the first 2 vertebrae of the neck. So they don't have any idea how the skull was positioned with the spinal cord. Yet they say it had a human-like curve in the lower spine. But they found no vertebra from the lower spine. They based this upon the pelvis alone. The pelvis, though, was too broken and fragile to take out of its matrix, meaning the rock that it was found at. You can see the picture in the bottom right. And so they have to do CT, and that showed that there was 14 possible configurations of the spine. 14 ways that it could be put together that fit. And of course, they choose the one that make it look more human-like. Now you can see there closely on the skull there that the foramen magnum, not really positioned there well. The hip there, that's the CT image of it and how they tried to arrange it. Even the secular scientists, as I said before, do have problems with this. A Dr. Wood and a Dr. Harrison say this is highly speculative inferences, especially for the pelvis. And so there is a lot that they try to put forward on this, but there are also a lot that the evolutionists themselves are saying, no, this doesn't make sense. Next, and probably most famous, is Lucy. She was named Lucy because when they found her, they were listening to a famous Beatles song. If you can guess it, yep, that's right, it was Yellow Submarine. No, I'm just kidding. It was Lucy in the Sky. But they named her that because that's the song they were listening to. Lucy is supposedly about 3 to 4 million years old. That's how they dated it based upon the sediment. Now, since they found Lucy, they have bones and teeth from about 300 other individuals of the same species, or at least they're grouping them as the same species. Still, Lucy is considered the gold standard to judge any ape-like ancestor. She was discovered in 1974 and appears to be a fully grown female primate that was about 3.5 feet tall, so relatively small. They only found 47 bones, about 20% of the skeleton, some of the upper body, vertebra, ribs, pelvis. Most of the hands and feet were missing, and most of the skull is missing, except for the jaw and a cranial fragment. You can see 2 possible orientations. You have the ape-like one that is just an ape, and then you have the one that evolutionists put forward where they tried to make it appear more human-like. Though even the evolutionists say that she is not a direct ancestor to humans, though many do still tout her as the mother of all humankind, or Lucy's legacy. Her story is your story. But let's look a little bit closer. Since much of the skull was not found, that means that they put a lot of their own into the skull. You can see there on the bottom left, the skull that they found, the brown pieces again, are hers. The white portions are what they filled in. And yet, on the left is a modern bonobo. That's like a small chimp skull. If you were to fill in the stuff that they filled in with what looks like a bonobo, then it would be a 100% match. Even Dr. Solomon Zuckerman, a paleo expert, said that the Australopithecine skull, he's not talking about Lucy here, but her genus in general. This was actually quoted a little bit before Lucy was found, just a few years. But the Australopithecine skull is in fact so overwhelmingly ape-like as opposed to human that the contrary position could be equated to an assertion that black is white. Now he's British, so he's doing this in a very articulate way. But in short, he's saying that to try and say that this skull looks like a human is trying to convince me that black is white. Now, Lucy's skull did not have what is called the inner ear. Inside our ear, we have a little organ there that does a number of things. It helps us hear, but it also helps us balance. We have 3 rings in our ear that help us figure out where we're moving in 3-dimensional space. We can feel ourselves lean forward or backward, side to side, or up and down. That's one of the ways you know that an elevator is actually moving up or down, or that a car is accelerating or decelerating. Now, they did find a few other of her supposed species skull that has this imprint in it. And this orientation is nearly identical to the modern African apes. While Lucy had no evidence in hers, because the skull portion was missing, others that they link with Lucy do. And so we can infer that Lucy's was the same way. The balancing system in her skull was made for a four-legged quadrupedal ape. Now let's talk about the foramen magnum again. Again, it's one of the best ways to determine if a creature was upright or four-legged. Again, it's the hole where the spinal cord enters the skull. Lucy's is nearly identical to a chimp. There is, again, a very good range as far as chimps and humans, and she was higher, just a little bit, than some modern apes, yet well below the human range. The legs. Now, even evolutionists say that her pelvis was well adapted for tree living. Now, her orientation of the pelvis is argued over. This is because when they found it, it was fractured. Some evolutionists, like Stern, Sussman, and Tuttle, believe that it was ape-like. Owen Lovejoy, though, he actually did this on a documentary where you can see him making a plaster and then cutting it into pieces to fit it more human-like. And then others, more modern analysis, say that it was somewhat bipedal, but not like human bipedal. So they tried to find somewhere in between. But her pelvis was extremely fractured. So we can't really say for sure on that, one way or the other, but most of the evidence is pointing to that she walked on all fours, as we already touched on. Now the fingers. You can see one of the fingers there of an Australopithecine and a human finger. Very curved, very much like a modern ape. It's very well for grasping, very well for grabbing those trees and knuckle walking. The wrist as well. You can see Lucy's wrist in the top left. You see that little arch there? That is for locking the wrist. You can see a modern chip wrist. That little arch there, great for locking the wrist. And even the mechanism there in the top right. Thank you, Micah. I try to have pictures where the image won't see or won't block it, but it's hard. So Lucy's wrists were designed for the classic knuckle walking ape. Even George Washington University says this. And now for Lucy's feet. This is basically the Lutuli footprints because Lucy's feet were not found. They found one little toe, but not a foot. So they found footprints in 1976, 1,000 plus miles away from where Lucy was found. But because the sediment that they found it in, they've dated to the same time that Lucy was, give or take 500,000 years, that they try to say that these are her footprints. They found a total initially of about 31 from a larger foot and 38 from a smaller foot. So in total, 2 adults and a child, their footprints were preserved in volcanic ash. The footprints were about 10 inches long, a 9.5 shoe size. Now, normally, a person with a 9.5 shoe size is 5 foot 9 inches tall. Remember, Lucy was only 3.5. Most of her species that they at least group with her are short like her. So that is an incredibly large foot for a creature her size. And the footprints themselves are identical to a human's footprint. You can see there the picture, the big toe and the foot. This looks like somebody was walking in the sand just a few minutes ago, potentially. They found some more in 2016, just a few hundred meters away from the originals. And the people that live in this area claim that those are from their ancestors. There are a total of 5 bipedal humans moving through the Lentoli landscape, and they tried to connect this to Lucy just because they've dated the sediment to where they want to put Lucy in the evolutionary timescale. So in summary, we don't have any lower back. The knee was found 200 feet deeper. They had to adjust the pelvis because it was fractured. And it was fractured, they themselves say, because she fell out of a 40-foot tall tree. It was fractured in such a way that they have to say that she was traveling at least 35 miles per hour, and the tree is the best explanation for this. It makes perfect sense if an ape designed to live in a tree was living in a tree, but it doesn't make much sense for a human ancestor that's half ape, half human, that was designed to walk on two legs, to be 40 feet up in the tree, and we just happened to catch it. Lucy is virtually identical to a pygmy chimp. Body size, stature, brain size. She has an ape big toe, and others of her supposed species have an ape in her ear. So it is fine to say that Lucy probably had an ape in her ear. All of these point to an ape, not to a human. Next, we're going to be going over Homo habilis. And this is the one from that list before that is not a human. It supposedly lived 1.4 to 2.4 million years ago. That means there was a long period of time, 2 to 3 billion years, where there was no fossils that showed any transition from apes to humans, according to the evolutionary theory. That's a long time to go without transitions. Now, in 1959, they found the ape skull bits and some stone tools. And this was found in a pile of bones and some other animal bones, some fragments of stone tools and such, all in just one big pile. They never found a complete creature. They found 13 teeth, a molar, a few skull fragments, 21 fingers, hand, and wrist bones. And later this was described as the defining specimen, but later was found to be from different animals. 6 to 21 finger bones belong to actually different creatures. So basically, almost a third of the bones that they found that said came from one creature actually were from different creatures. You can see the site there on the left. All those little dots are things that they found. The circle is actually a hut that they found, or remains of a hut. The Homo habilis bones that they found there were above the hut, meaning whoever built the hut came before the bones were put in there. And remember, there were other animal bones in there. And this hut actually looks virtually similar, strikingly similar, it said, to the dome-shaped hut shelters that are still made by nomadic people today. So this is human technology found with these bones. It's a much better explanation to say that this is just a trash pile of humans. They had a hut here. For some reason, they abandoned this hut, maybe it broke down, and then they built a trash pile on top of the hut where they put all of their leftovers. Means that they were probably eating apes, but they were eating a number of other animals as well and tossing their broken stone tools in there. Now even evolutionists are saying that it's just a mixture of bones. They admit that. They have tried to force fit this with human and animal bones to try and get some sort of transition species. They even call it a wastebasket species. And so they've tried to get a transition species from the very ape-like ones that they even have to admit are ape-like to the more human ones, which are virtually identical to humans, minus a few characteristics that we're going to go over here next. And this is one of the best ones for that. Yet it's a wastebasket, as they themselves call it. Next, and probably the most famous of all these, is Neanderthals. According to the evolutionary theory, Neanderthals existed 40 to 400,000 years ago. And they were first depicted as gorilla-like cavemen. But now they're positioned closer to humans by the evolutionary taxonomists. So there is some push to say that they actually are humans, which, as a creationist, we've known since the beginning. The characteristics that make them different from you or I, for the most part, are the bell-shaped chest. Their brains were actually larger than ours, but mainly due to size. Small forehead, a sloping forehead, a very small chin, and a very pronounced brow ridge. Yet these characteristics can be found in modern people. This is either a current or a potentially former now Russian member of parliament. A very pronounced brow ridge. A very pronounced sagittal crest. You actually may recognize one of these people from Hollywood. And again, another very prominent brow ridge. Now both the evolutionary and biblical models agree that they lived in Europe, in Asia, because that's where we're finding these bones, and they existed during the Ice Age. It's the timeline that we disagree on, and we will go over the Ice Age at a later date when it fits more with how we're going through the Bible chronologically. We know that they carry the genes for light skin that are found in Europeans today. And some, mainly the evolutionists, think that they gave these genes to the Europeans. The biblical model doesn't care one way or the other on that. Now, they're not part of the evolutionary out of Africa event, meaning evolutionists say that modern humans came out of Africa and then spread everywhere they are now. Neanderthals aren't part of that. Yet, we still have their DNA within us today. Some will even say 60% of Neanderthal DNA is found in people today. So you could have Neanderthal DNA within you. And it is likely even higher, because whenever they find Neanderthal remains and get a DNA sample, that's old. At least a few thousand years old. Both models say that. And it's not really preserved well. It's in the ground. It's exposed to the elements. DNA is not that stable of a molecule. We're only seeing the part that still matches. So it could be even up to 100%. We just can't say that for sure. But we know that we have a lot of their DNA within us, meaning relations. Now, as far as the fossil evidence, there are some that fit neatly into a category that evolutionists call Neanderthals, some of those features that we talked about before. And we have a lot that fit neatly into the modern human category, as evolutionists call them. Yet there are a number that don't fit in either category. Evolutionists would describe these finds as progressive Neanderthals or advanced Neanderthals. And we have a number of burial sites. And they actually buried their dead in rocks or shelters, very similar to the burial practices of Abraham in the Bible and even modern humans, people today. Now, here are some that are mixed burials, and you may recognize some of these places. Mount Carmel, Galilee, another Mount Carmel cave. Some of these burials look very Neanderthal-like as they are described, meaning that they match other pure Neanderthal burial sites. Others look very modern, very today people burial sites. Yet there are bones from one group found in the opposite and vice versa. This shows that the people that buried their dead here at least thought that they were family. They accepted them as family, because you do not bury your dead with people you don't see as family. You don't bury your dead with your livestock usually. Now, a number of Neanderthal finds that they had at a lot of these places were their stone tools. And they had quite a variety. You can see both in size and shape. A lot of these spears are massive and just incredible. They're also finding a lot of large game remains. So they probably used these spears to hunt or at least butcher this large game that they found. Their spears are especially neat because they are fashioned like modern javelins, meaning that in either a few thousand years based upon the biblical model or tens of thousand years based upon the evolutionary model, if not hundreds of thousand years, mankind has not made a very much better spear. And one thing that they did better than we do today is they had a very unique glue that they used. And I'm not aware that we've been able to match this. They've been able to make a glue to attach the spearheads to their posts, and don't know how they did it, but it's a great glue. They're also very large spears, 7 to 7.5 feet long. And they were artists. You can see that they actually had constellations there: Orion, Taurus, and Pleiades. And art is, by and large, considered an indication of full humanity. They draw better than some people I know. They draw as good as some people I know. They were very talented for having to live in the harsh conditions that they did. Yet many of the evolutionary community downplay this in the extreme. So much so that Paul Bond and Clive Gamble have some quotes there and some reviews of this. And it's not just pictures. They also had a lot of jewelry, mainly bone teeth and ivory, but that's what they were mainly dealing with. They had elephant tibias with lines drawn on it. There was even a mask at one place. But look at all this, earrings and decorative teeth and such. This is pretty. I can only imagine when it was new how it may have looked. These are clear signs of humanity. Neanderthals are no different than us. They just looked a little different. They are clearly and completely human. They existed post-flood during the Ice Age. They specialized in hunting abundantly large animals like mammoths and stuff like that, though there is some controversy as mammoths themselves, but the other large animals were far more likely to be taken down by them. Now, they were probably the first people to push into Europe after the flood, and they lived in a very harsh climate. They don't appear to have settled in large groups, and then once the weather warmed and other people moved up from the Middle East, they seem to have interbred and intermarried and lived together with them. And that's why we have a lot of the DNA within us today. So, in short, we can clearly see from the fossil record an ape is an ape and a man is a man. There is some overlap as far as some characteristics that are ape-like that are found in humans, or vice versa. Yet they are very few and clearly understood. If you were to take a fossil find as a whole and you find ape knees, ape hips, ape skull, but you have thick enamel, it's probably an ape. Yet if you have human knees, human hips, human skull, it's probably a human. Yet evolutionists do try to bring an ape up to a human level and bring a human down to an ape level to try and bridge that gap. But the evidence is very sparse for that, virtually none. So we went over some of the clear things today, some of the big things today. There is a lot more out there on this, and Bones of Contention is a great resource for that. So if you have any questions, if this is a big conundrum for you, please look into that. But next time, we're going to be going over the genetics of both biblical man and apes and show that there is no connection even in the genes today. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, that's it for today. I'll turn it over to John for a closing prayer.